grandpa's world. And he, as the child, and now as the adult writer, because he's been treated like an adult, is going to put the two together and create this extraordinary combination, which is magical realism. So the title of the second story, Isle of the Blue Dog, is just like a really odd phrase that Garcia Marquez comes up with on his own. Death Constant Beyond Love, however, has a backstory. And it's a quotation from Baroque poem, from a poem from many hundred years ago, from the 1630s, by Spanish poet Francisco Gómez de Quevedo, very, very famous one. So kind of a to be or not to be moment. And what's important, I've given you the poem here, Amor constante más allá de la muerte. I've given you that specifically so that you can see what is wrong with the title. Death Constant Beyond Love is the title that we have in Garcia Marquez's text. And then I've given you a translation of the Spanish text. I wanted you to look at the Spanish language, however, on the right side. And of course, the crucial thing is it's backwards. It should be amor. Love is what is supposed to be constant beyond death. The poem imagines how even though humans are mortal, even though we must all die, still, even beyond the grave, love will be there. Garcia Marquez is preoccupied with love, heterosexual love between men and women, and with death, and maybe perhaps most of all, I would suggest, with loneliness. You might think of those images of the absinthe drinkers in Paris, the loneliness of a modern world, or maybe even here we want to use the phrase, a postmodern world. So the way that these cities are built and the way that Rosal del Viri, an illusionary village, is described is pretty strange. Lots of coastal villages in Mexico actually have some affinities to this, as well as out on the islands in the Caribbean and along the coast of Colombia. So there are places that are a bit like this. But I always find that the artist who comes to mind for me most for Rosal del Viri is M.C. Escher. Escher does images, actually mostly of Italian villages, so this is kind of in the mountains in Italy, not far from where Dante was, in fact, would be the connection to make here. And the way in which landscapes, relativity is one of Escher's most interesting places, can quickly become twisted, self-recursive labyrinths. You might think about the image of the labyrinth that we have all the way through the garden of Forking Pass. And then I want simply to give you this image of an actual place, Jalapa. So it is a place in Mexico, which an artist, a photography-based artist. So do photographs tell us what the world is like, or are they just as much a matter of creation and fiction as any other medium? I've asked you to think about cameras and photographs and representation. So this is Jalapa, Mexico, in a photograph, but it's obviously a photograph that has been twisted and manipulated to look as dreamlike as the things do in Garcia Marquez's story. So it's a political satire piece about Senator Onésimo Sánchez. And it blows the suspense, ruins the suspense. Spoiler alert right from the start. First sentence, after having promised us that he's going to flip our expectation that love should last forever and say, no, the thing that's permanent, it's the death part, not the love part. We get introduced to Onésimo Sánchez, and we're told very simply, he had 6 months and 11 days to go before his death, and he found the woman of his life. And we're told where he met her, so we'll use Jalapa here as a kind of place marker for Rosal del Viri, an illusory village, which by night was the furtive wharf for smugglers' ships, on the other hand, in broad daylight, looked like one of the most useless inlets in a desert. So I invite you to think about the city as character and the fact that Rosal del Viri is really two cities. You might think about neighborhoods and parts of the world that you know. Do they seem very different at 2 o'clock in the afternoon as opposed to how they feel at 2 o'clock in the morning? So our senator has been given a fatal diagnosis. Only his doctors and he, we know, on 256 are aware of what's wrong. And rather like Okonkwo and some of the other tough guys we've encountered, Gilgamesh, even Enkidu, he's not going to let anyone know about his weakness. So he's on tour in a very specific way. He's on campaign. And we get a wonderful satirical image on 257 of the show that a politician can put on. Gabriel Garcia Marquez says there was a pattern to the circus, his word in the original Spanish as well. So the political campaign or the political rally as circus. There was a pattern to his circus. As he spoke, his aides threw clusters of paper birds into the air, and artificial creatures took on life, flew about the platform of planks, and went out to sea. You might think, I feel like it's not so much paper birds that we use, but if you think about the conventions coming up, it's a great story to read in an election year. I feel like the thing in the United States, if we stay just local, with where University of Texas is, it tends to be balloons. It's all about hundreds of thousands of balloons. And of course, Garcia Marquez just nudges it one little bit further, and suddenly the balloons don't just fall the way the paper birds might, but they actually take flight. The balloons float upwards. So everyone wants a favor from him, and he's handing out favors. And one of the people who wants a favor is someone called Nelson Farino. And Nelson Farino does actually have one thing which Senator Sanchez really would like. What he has is a daughter, Laura Farina. And Laura Farina is suddenly fascinatingly interesting, this very young woman to this much older man. It's a very disturbing, almost potentially predatory scene set up here. The father, in effect, is providing his daughter to the politician. And she's beautiful, and we described how lovely she is on 262, how conventionally attractive she is. And he finds a rose that the two of them were going to discuss and look at. The senator followed the thread of her look and found the rose, which had been tarnished by saltpeter. So they're looking at the rose, it's been a little bit, it's dusted with a kind of black dust. It's a rose, he said. I learned what they were in Riohacha. So he's thinking about the rose, and he's thinking about himself as well. So he sits down. This is the tryst, the meeting that's been arranged by the father. Very dangerous position for Laura here. And he imagines, we're told. So again, the rose is real, but this is what he's imagining. He imagines his heart to be somewhere. Does he have a heart? Well, literally he does. But he imagines the heart that might be more than just the organ that keeps him alive. On the side where he imagined his heart to be, inside his chest, he had a corsair's tattoo of a heart pierced by an arrow. So does the senator in this magical world have a real heart? Or is actually he such an unethical and unpleasant person that really all he's got is the fake tattooed heart? So he looks at her, and obviously the setup is some kind of sexual agreement that's been made as to whether he and she will have a physical experience just in the moment. But what they're talking about actually is not particularly sex or love. What they're talking about is, at the top of 263, loneliness, solitude. What he says is, no one actually loves us. Every one of us, he meditates, he reflects, is really alone. So as they move towards what looks like it's going to be a sexual consummation, he discovers something. And this is the outrageous element of the story. Again, I hope it wasn't one that was offensive to people, but it's a brilliant moment of surprise. He discovers, I suppose it's a kind of chastity belt, but it's not. It's a padlock, a lock, the kind of thing you would put on a cupboard or a door. He discovers this as something that's an impediment to him consummating the sexual relationship with her. He's pretty horrified by the whole experience. And Laura shares with him at the top of 264 her views of him as a human being. You're different from the other people because they actually say you're actually worse than other politicians are, worse than other men, worse than other public people. The senator is just so despairing, so beyond. He knows he's dying. He's been an unethical person, clearly manipulating people for years, a kind of Mephistopheles character, a trickster. He doesn't get upset with the very critical, direct thing that she said. And then he says, forget about it. And interestingly, actually, it's the first text we've looked at that actually includes bad language in it. So just tell your dad, that bad guy, he says on 264, forget about it. We don't have to have sex. Whatever that thing, that favor he wants, he can have that favor. I'll give it to him. And then Farina, and this is a striking moment. I'm not going to unpack it for you. I want you to reflect on it. She's been given the, if you like, escape. He's not going to require her to engage with him sexually in order for her dad to get the benefit. And she decides, actually, at this moment to say, don't forget about the key. Why don't you just take a rest? Why don't you sleep a while with me? Not sleep with, but fall asleep with me for a while. And then this extraordinary phrase, it's one of the most beautiful ones in the whole course, I think. It's good to be with someone when you're so alone. Rather than a sexual consummation, a kind of predatory dominating one, what Senator Sanchez needs is very much what the dreamer needed in Eyes of the Blue Dog. She lays his head on her shoulder with her eyes fixed on the rose. They hold each other. And exactly 6 months and 11 days later, this is how he will die. So the image is one that is sorrowful, melancholic. There is a world without love, at least not real love. There's a world of predation and danger, especially for those who are vulnerable, like someone who, because of their age or their gender, like Laura, is put in unbearable positions by whoever controls them, in this case, Nelson. And then, as fragile as it seems, there's this moment of contact, the imaginary one in the eyes of the blue dog, the real one, quote unquote, of the two people lying in bed, doing nothing other than being near to each other, connecting with each other, letting each other be. The text you've looked at is not one that is cheerful. Neither of the short stories does that work, but it's one that allows one to imagine something resilient that gets one through the difficult times, reaching out and connecting, never sure whether you're in love, never sure whether it's going to last, or imagining something as weird as the eyes of the blue dog as the basis for something to talk about. So many of you might wonder, especially if you know Garcia Marquez, why did I pick the stories? They are famous and admired ones. It actually takes me back to my mother's hometown. I grew up visiting my grandmother in New Orleans and always loved George Rodriguez's blue dogs, these strange creatures who are always showing up in ancient Egypt, in all kinds of dream worlds, with butterfly wings in strange ways. Like Virginia Woolf, who can't change the fact that World War I happened, can't change that women are second-class citizens in early 20th century Britain. Garcia Marquez can't change the world. But what he can do is change our perspective on it, invite us into a space between the magic and the real, where we could chat with people. That's what I've been trying to do with you today. We're kind of you and me, you all and me, like the man and the woman awake in the middle of the night, using the eyes of the blue dog, not as a phrase that means something exactly, but as a way of connecting, so that perhaps even for a moment, I hope you enjoyed the stories, we are not quite so alone. So as always, I finish with just my face getting bigger at the end for a second, just to say goodbye, as it were, kind of in person. So that's the last literary text. That's the last one for which you will have an entry. I'll just do a little video to try to help you with the last assignment and upload that for you. So I'll be in touch with you with that and with the TAs very soon. It's a beautiful day here in Austin, Texas. I know the weather is not good everywhere. And I know, if you like, the way the weather of our souls is feeling is obviously somewhat heavy. And I hope you enjoyed at least a little break with these stories from all your other end of semester projects and all the other things that are weighing on your lives. I wish we could do this in person, but we'll have to settle for the virtual. We'll have to settle for the recorded, for email, for virtual office hours. Hope you are well and in good health. Stay well, be healthy, and I'll connect with you really soon. Bye-bye.